delighted to have with me today Yasmin Shaheen-Zaffar, and she's here to help me celebrate what we're trying to do with missions. The Emissions Accepted mission cast is to celebrate all the women who have been, made a shift in their lives to do something that's very meaningful to them, so that they can also do things that are helpful for the world around them. And Yasmin is one of those women. So Yasmin, welcome.
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me, Susie. I'm absolutely excited and honoured.
Oh, that's brilliant. Look, we're really looking forward to hearing your story, Yasmin. So I wonder if you could just start by telling me what it was that you were doing in terms of work and things before you discovered this mission that you have now.
Okay. So I'm 51 now. So it was around in my early 40s. I was still a web developer and building websites. And I was finding it was great. The pay was great. But I was just finding it wasn't really what I wanted to do. I've always wanted to help people and support people. So it was in my early 40s I began looking at training as a psychotherapist. And I'd been in therapy myself and I'd seen the change. So from building websites to supporting people make change in their lives.
And what's really interesting about what you've been doing is it's not, that was part of the change, but there's been an additional change on top of that where you probably couldn't have gone from web developer to what you're doing now. You kind of needed that stepping stone process. So tell us a bit about what's exciting you now about what it is that you're doing.
Okay, so it's great. I was sat in the therapy room and I'm helping people one-to-one. But I wanted to reach more people. And I suppose my passion is working with parents and working with people who want to build better bonds in relationships. And when I say relationships, I don't just mean intimate partner relationships. I mean relationships with their children, relationships with family members, relationships with, I don't know, themselves. They're the biggest. So, but I really wanted to support more people and reach those that therapy wasn't accessible to. Because as a therapist, I work in private practice and I know that therapy isn't accessible to so many people for different reasons, whether it's finance, the cost of it, whether it's time. And especially if you're a busy parent, to bring your child to go to therapy once a week is quite time consuming. But what I also learned, and this is the amazing thing, that there's so many strategies people can learn. They don't need to go to a therapist that can help them on their journey, and they can psychoeducation. I'm a real believer in psychoeducation. So what's exciting for me is I went on some training, some additional training. It was a 7-month trauma and stress studies certificate program with the Trauma Institute. It's led by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote The Body Keeps the Score. I think a lot of people have heard about this book now.
Yeah.
And, polyvagal theory really spoke to me.
So that's something that if someone said, what do you know about polyvagal theory? They're just going to go, never heard, what is this?
Well, the thing is, I'm dyslexic, dyspraxic, and I'm late diagnosed ADHD. So it took me a few years to understand this theory because the textbooks, I just wasn't getting it. And then when the theory is actually quite simple. And it's about how our nervous system reacts to external and internal stimuli. So stress, for example. And it really sort of explains how our biology impacts our behaviors and our emotions. And you know what? I was absolutely shocked, Susie, that I didn't know how to emotionally regulate until my early 40s. And it's when I learned about polyvagal theory. And I was like, wow, how we communicate with other people, you know, how stress impacts us, you know, our behaviors when we don't feel safe. And, you know, and I thought this was just like changed my life. And the best thing is it changed the relationship I had with my youngest daughter. It's just made me such a better parent, a more compassionate, understanding parent. And we've got she's 18 now. We've got an amazing relationship. And I put that down to polyvagal theory and applying that.
And so your mission now is to make that more accessible to people.
Yeah. So my mission is to help support and create generations of families and children and parents and grandparents and caregivers that are polyvagal aware. And that means that they befriend their nervous system, and befriending your nervous system is a term coined by Deb Dana. She has translated Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory to a more way that could be understood. But I still couldn't understand that either. And I realized I'm neurodivergent. So I created resources that help visualize. There's some therapy cards that parents can use, therapists can use. You can use them with teens and tweens also, and emerging adults. And it really helps you understand polyvagal theory in a really simple and fun way.
Yeah, and you've only been doing this for a few months with the cards, right? And you've already sold like 1,000 decks of cards.
I've sold over 1,000. Yeah. So I'm really excited about this because this is just the tip of the iceberg. I've got a game in development. I've got the first prototype out. So I sold 100 of the boards that I had made, and now I'm just getting feedback from therapists. So I can move on to the second board and release. It's called What's Your State? And it's a board game to help people recognize emotions, link behaviors to emotions, and to actually make it a bit fun as well. Because
absolutely.
I mean, it doesn't have to be boring.
So when you see yourself doing that now, and you think back to 10 years ago when you first were thinking about making that shift out of web development into something else, can you quite believe it that that's what the journey's been?
Yeah, I mean, I can and I can't, because I always knew, and I think partly because of my own lived experience, that I wanted to do something to especially support families, but I just didn't know what. Or
it's often the case. And it really is often a journey, isn't it? I mean, the psychotherapy was obviously a huge part of that, but now you've found this. Sometimes it's several steps along the way that you find the thing that really, really lights you up, which is, you know, we can see about the way you talk about it.
Yeah, and you know, the really interesting thing is my tech and my web development hasn't gone to waste, because I've built all my own websites. I do my own development. I'm working on an app. So I do all that. So I've been able to transfer my skills. And the pandemic really helped, actually, because suddenly I was trying to get away from tech and IT. And then the pandemic, I was thrown back into it because we were all working online. So that's really your journey, I suppose. you do get to where you need to get to, but it's never in a straight line though.
No, it isn't. And did you doubt yourself at all along the way? Did you say it's crazy to be making cards and board games and things like that? Or did...
Yeah, and I've got an article that just went into the BACP Private Therapy magazine. It's a 2-page article about creating tools. And, in there, I was writing the article and I realized there was a stage I wasn't even going to bring the board game out because Deb Dana, who's a fantastic person, a professional, she's translated Stephen Porges's, as I've mentioned, polyvagal theory into therapist speech. And she used the metaphor of the ladder to explain the hierarchy of states. But I'm very much into embodied processing and shifting trauma also. So I created a new metaphor of the track to go with the board game so people can actually move their markers across the different states. And to me, that felt really important. And then I was like, well, I'm only a counsellor and I'm no one important at all. So, I had this, what's Deb Dana going to say? Because I brought out, and she's probably going to say nothing. In fact, I approached them and they've been really helpful. They're helping me find speakers for some programs that I'm running. But this sort of self-doubt, like, well, who am I really? I'm a nobody, thinking that I'm going to do something.
Yeah, and you just kind of have to do it anyway, right? Don't you? You just have to give it a go and
yeah,
see
and
what
I
will
really
happen.
do believe that when you're really passionate about something, that the fear, it removes the fear. Otherwise you're like, oh, is this the right thing? All this self-critical talk. But when you really believe in this, and I get so excited because I think, well, even with epigenetics and trauma being passed from generation to generation, if we can prevent, in the first instance, how's that going to impact? Obviously, we can't prevent in every case, but if we can increase the number of mental health issues that are prevented, that's going to help generations to come also. So yeah.
So what does it mean to you, Yasmin, to be doing this work compared to what you're doing before? What does it mean to you on a sort of day-to-day basis to be able to get up each day and work on something that is so important to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because, a lot of people, when you're first starting out, no one's heard of you. You have to, in a way, prove yourself. So that is really difficult. But that it doesn't stop me. Yeah. It's making those connections, those initial connections. And, I never used to like being on camera. But now, since the end of last year, I've become unhidden. So that's taken some getting used to.
Yeah. And what about this idea of women in their 40s and 50s doing this kind of thing? What is it about being the age you are now rather than maybe doing it when you were 20? Do you feel there's some advantages from being the age you are now?
Yeah, I think most definitely the advantage is there's a lot of lived experience, just from your work ethic, perhaps less commitments. My children grown up. I don't have that added pressure. So there's time. There's also skills that you've picked up over the years. I think back and I've been involved in projects in my 20s, 30s, you know, wasting a lot of money on, you know, all sorts of things, setting up a business. And now I look back and I think, of course, it wasn't going to work. So I think for most people, I can certainly speak for myself, you become a lot more savvy.
Mm-hmm. So if someone was sort of in a similar position to where you were maybe 10 years ago and thinking about changing to something that was more meaningful, then what message would you give to them?
I would say it's totally possible, and to just trust your gut. And things take time. You know, we want to sort of, I think there is the mentality that, you know, we get so excited. Well, I do. And I want it to happen now. And it doesn't. It can take, you know, setting something up 2, 3, 5 years, even more. But yeah, to keep going if you truly believe in it.
Yasmin, that's fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And of course, if anyone is pricking up about the polyvagal cards and board games and things, we've got a link to your website. So if this is something that interests people, then go and check it out and see these amazing cards that Yasmin has made. Thank you, Yasmin, so much for joining us.
That's great. Thank you, Susie.